Hey guys, time for a new line, Staunton-Cochrane variation. I guess most of you have lots of problems how to deal against e4, c5, c4. And it's not a variation to be underestimated. And I gotta be honest, it is usually underestimated by most of black players. It looks like a bad version of English defense, and it actually transposes to an English defense. So black might have lots of problems against this at first glance, very odd and nothing that special move for white, if you ask me. Although we just have to take a deeper look at these variations, and I gotta show you one, in my opinion, probably strongest plan for black. What I have a special thing for you here. It's going to be a gift that is going to be published very soon. It's going to be my Blitz game that I played live and that my student James Marsh filmed me while I was playing that Blitz tournament. It was like a couple months ago, and I played it against a pretty good player, FM. And I played exactly this variation, so you're going to be able to see how the game went. So let's go. After e4, c5, c4, they just go with some weird version of English defense that resembles on Botvinnik variation in English for white. Why is that so interesting and so special? Because right after, I'm just going to show you how to treat this variation with the Botvinnik system for black yourself. So after like c4, you of course play knight e6, controlling the d4 square and not allowing them to play any d4, and they go knight c3. Those who play knight f3, I just want to show you two relatively nice systems. You always go with the 6, getting like a full flexibility. For those who like to play e6 systems, go with a6 and play a good version of Taimanov defense type of positions where you absolutely have a decent game, and you can play this without queen on a5. You can play with queen a5, but you can also play, and that's more likely to happen, with a queen on c7. At the moment, you threaten knight e4. Those who would like to follow my instructions, I suggest d6. And when they go with d4, you can once again take and, for example, go into the hedgehog type of position because they committed themselves with d4. So you have to play hedgehog. But you can also play bishop g4. Quite an interesting thing. I was pretty young when I played a game against, at that time, a strong FM Stamenkovic, 2370 FIDE, who played d5. I played knight d4, and this is how we made the draw. He gave check. I brought a bishop back. He brought a queen back to d1. I pinned him once again. Then somebody after the game said, why didn't he play bishop on e2? Because in that case, I would just give up my bishop for the knight. And don't forget, this position has more of like closed characteristics. So you just go with g6, bishop g7, and queen b6 to support knight on d4 by queen on b6, pawn on c5, and bishop on g7. Plus, you have some sort of pressure against the b2 pawn. This is absolutely satisfying game for black. That's why most of these guys who play Staunton-Cochrane variation, they will go with knight c3. And everybody actually plays like this. Position looks already extremely boring. For those who like Chess Informant codes, it's English A36. So after knight c3, my suggestion and vote goes to g6. Here I'd like to mention suggestion by Grandmaster Jonathan Ems, who said play e5 and after g3 go with h5. That's an interesting suggestion, and maybe one day I can just show you how to treat this position in a very specific way like this. Although that's just one option, and here I'm going to show you like a fully flexible system with g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, and then you go with d6. What's so special about d6? Nothing that's special. You can also play knight f6 without d6 straight away. They go d3, you go knight f6. They go knight g on e2 because they would like to go with either bishop e3, queen d2, or f4 at some point. And when you play castles, here comes the real move for black. And I guarantee that most of you who wanted to play against this position, you guys probably played like this the way I showed you so far. Although, who really wants to have like a decent game and probably the best possible game for you is if you have a good plan, you got to remember the following plan. It's called Botvinnik's plan or Botvinnik's system. And what is even funnier, this is a Botvinnik system in English opening for white as well. So Botvinnik is beating Botvinnik himself. Knight e8. And your knight opens up the bishop on g7, controls d4 for the rest of the game. You'd like on any bishop e3 because they might threaten some d4 at some point, jump with the knight on d4. By open bishop on g7, you're going to hold the center and the d4 square. And at the same time, you just reposition this knight via e8, c7 to eventually e6. From e6, it is going to forever control center, d4 square, and potentially, as soon as they play f4, you just have to either take on d4 and bring that knight from e6 to d4, or play f5 without allowing white to harass your knight with f5 at any point. So when they play bishop e3, take a look at this. Maybe at some point, maybe they want to go with some d4. And that is especially good for white since there is no more knight on f6 that could harass this bishop on e3. Or simply your knight simply stands pretty bad on e8 unless after bishop e3, you just jump with the knight on d4, which is supported by the bishop on g7. So you just go with it. And let's take a look at this. Most of these guys go with a rook b1 because they'd like to undermine knight on d4 with b4. But what happens if they just go with a classic queen d2? Aha! You want to go with bishop h6. You want to trade off my dark square bishop. I don't care. You know, looks like they're going to do that. And they go bishop h6, and they're going to weaken the dark squares. And now you play a crucial move that I learned from a book by one of the best coaches ever, Mark Dvoretsky. He said, when they exchanged in English openings, whether you're white or black, but similar, it's absolutely the same theme, you just have to go with e5 because you no longer have bishop on g7. You can absolutely close the game with e5 because they're going to swap it off anyways because they already committed themselves with bishop h6. And now, furthermore, you even create a weak bishop on g2. So after bishop g7, any f4, you play f6, and take a look at the bishop on g2. It looks terribly weak, unlike our bishop on c8 that looks kind of open. And that's a good thing. That's a great positional thing and advice for all of you guys. Just because of that, most of these guys go with rook to b1. And here, I opted for a game of one of my favorite players, Teimur Rajabov from Azerbaijan, who played this game against Spanish champion, who played against Elyanov, one of the best Ukrainian guys. And after rook b1, Rajabov played a5. Rajabov played a5 to forever stop b4 or to stop it for the time being in order not to be challenged on d4 and in the center. When this guy played a3, in order to play b4 at all costs, he just went for a4. Fantastic move. Resembles on those King's Indian positions when they play a3, and you can appreciate a4, and they can never play any b3 or b4 because you would play a takes b3 and forever create like a weak and kind of isolated pawn on the a file for your opponent. The thing is, in one of the games played between Loren da Costa and Mamedov, Nijat, this guy played queen d2. Do I have to explain you? He still hasn't committed himself with bishop h6, so you just continue with your plan. you go knight c7 and you'd like to reposition your knight on e6, or at some point take on e2, play knight e6 and knight e4. As soon as they play bishop h6, that's what Da Costa did. e5 happened, and I already explained you this idea. And after bishop g7, king g7, f4, f6, once again, I'm pointing out the difference between bishop on c8 and bishop on g2. Afterwards, they went like rook f2, bishop g4, forcing this guy to captured like this, and black was the one who absolutely had like a great defensive game on the queen side, while at the same time, black managed to create some counter-attacking threats on the queen side and managed to win the game. Let's get back to the game between Elyanov and Radjabov. After a4, this guy played f4. In the case of bishop takes d4, because knight cannot take because of e takes d4, c takes d4 and the fork. In the case of bishop d4, c takes, knight a4. Aha, he wins the pawn. And not a big deal. Reminds me on King's Indian type of games. You play e5, you end up with the bishop pair. All of a sudden, you now want to, since you're down a pawn, you want to go for some sort of compensation and pretty active approach for the rest of the game. Well, your opponent has lots of troubles, because if he finds b3 to create a shelter, they actually have problems with a3. You play knight f6, they go queen d2, you go h5. I'm willing to go with h4 since they don't have the knight on f3, so I might organize the kingside attack. I want to play bishop d7, harassing that knight on a4, because if they move it, a3 is hanging. And all things considered, I can even double up my rooks on the a file if needed. In this game was f4 by white, and you know what? After f4, now Radjabov played bishop d7. He realized how important was to have this bishop on d7 to defend the opponent. After like bishop f2, aha, why does he play bishop f2? You got to understand that. No more, all the time, you couldn't take, I mean, white couldn't take because of fork c takes d4 while the bishop was on e3. Right now, white threatens to take on d4. So it's a great moment to reposition this knight. Knight d4, c takes d4, and knight d5. And it's a very interesting thing. One thing is to take on d5 and to go into pretty much equalish type of middle game. But another thing was what Radjabov did. He brought this knight on a6, and this knight naturally wants to find its place on c5, go after the pawn on d3, of course, support the pawn on a4, and have like fantastic control of b3. That basically means that they would never be able to play any b3 or b4 for the time being. g4, aha, maybe they want to attack on the king side. Kick the knight away with them. Knight b4. Once again, they want to exchange and go into equalish type of the game. Knight c5. Once again, you bring the knight into the center and get like full control. Knight c2, going after e4 pawn, and you play e5. Here, e5 is usually a very, very debatable decision by black, but here not, because you have ideal time to block them on the dark squares. So on f5, if they play, I don't know, h4 followed by g5 or queen d2 followed by g5, they would be in the driver's seat. As soon as you play bishop f6 yourself, you're the one who's holding, like control of the dark squares, and now black is in the driver's seat. The guy played queen e2, played b5, breaking on the queen side, and Radjabov managed to win this game. Hopefully, this video is going to help you on creating this pretty side variation, but when it happens, it usually happens either by those who like to go in non-theoretical waters, or by good players who are willing to transpose the game into the English type of opening and defense that you usually hate to play against or you're unfamiliar with. Thank you so much for this, and see you later, guys.